This is Corey Kays, and I'm here with Nathan Bell. You're a jack of many trades and a master of all of them. Is that right?
I say master of none of them, but I can get along, and my boss likes to tell me I'm a mile wide and an inch deep. But
Yeah, okay. I'm trying to think, a mile wide and an inch deep.
I know a little bit about everything, but I'm not necessarily an expert in anything.
Okay.
It's kind of how that tends to play
So
out.
basically the opposite of what I just said about you. All right. Well, yeah,
Well, as a jack of all trades, right? Just not an expert necessarily. And
right. Well,
I'm an expert at knowing a little bit about everything.
okay. I mean, you put that all together, and I think it makes you an expert. But
I appreciate that.
yeah, so you have a chocolate business, first off. It's called Verse. It's healthy chocolate.
Yeah, so it's a dark chocolate, and so we kind of like to say chocolate is healthy. Similar nutritional characteristics to avocado. It's like a very high, healthy fat type product, and again, in its most natural state, there's no sugar in it. So we make a dark chocolate, and it's not necessarily healthier than other dark chocolates. It's just kind of we're really trying to promote that principle, that truth, that chocolate itself is actually quite healthy, as long as you're not pouring a whole bunch of sugar and a whole bunch of dairy solids and things like that into it.
Okay, so you're kind of debunking a myth that chocolate is unhealthy. It's actually healthy.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
And I mean, like a carameled apple, right? We got candied apple. Like no one thinks of an apple as candy, but you can cover it in caramel, and we call it a candied apple.
Oh.
I think that's the same way to think about chocolate made from the cocoa bean. If you mix it with heaps and heaps of sugar, well, then there are some problems with that,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, chocolate itself. Maybe a little tangent here right off the bat, but the legal definition of chocolate actually contains no sugar. So if you look at a candy bar, it'll usually say semi-sweet chocolate, or like chocolate chips. You'll get them. They always say semi-sweet because there's sugar has been added to it. But
Okay.
if you say just chocolate, by the legal USDA definition, it doesn't contain any sugar. So in that way, it's always kind of, well, yeah, chocolate's actually really, really healthy for you.
Okay.
And a dark chocolate, there's no real formal definition, but typically a dark chocolate only contains small amounts of sugar. So you're still in that, you're getting most of that health benefit.
Okay. So in a roundabout way, what you're saying is there's probably a lot of illegal chocolate being consumed, or not illegal, but not technically chocolate.
Right, yeah. Or kind of labeled in ways. Again, I mean, people are used to calling it chocolate, right? I mean, the kind of the common and usual description, and then the way people talk, it's chocolate, and there's nothing wrong with that. And some of this comes from my background of kind of regulatory, labeling and things like that, where I've been pretty steeped in that from time to time.
Gotcha.
But yeah, when we talk about chocolate, right? For generations, most Americans, most Westerners, probably most of the world, right, thinks of candy. Whereas a milk chocolate is a candy because it has a lot of milk and sugar in it. And a semi-sweet chocolate is candy because it typically has a lot of sugar in it. But a true dark chocolate, or when you just say chocolate, it's literally just a produce that's very low sugar with massive health benefits to it. It's quite the superfood. And yeah, so that's Verse Chocolate, and that's our whole intent. We're dark chocolate specialists, and it's all about kind of making that connection between the consumer and the farmer to make sure we're delivering the best possible dark chocolate that we can.
Wow. Well, that's good to know. I'm glad to know chocolate is so healthy. I'll eat a lot more of it. Just try to find it without the sugar.
That's exactly right.
Kind of stuff.
That's exactly right.
Well, you debunked one myth for me, that chocolate is unhealthy. So there's another thing. We were talking the other day, and you mentioned something. This was non-chocolate related. This was food in general. But you told me that in the whole grand scheme of things, food prices right now are actually very cheap comparatively to other times that we've had.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I that kind of like that stuck with me. So can you explain that? Because
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I see these fast food meals are getting up there.
Getting up there. So when I say something like that, my background is economics, specifically agricultural economics from an academic perspective, and looking over the history of the world. Certainly, right now, drastically, an order of magnitude, less of the economic inputs of our current modern economy go towards producing food, right? And that's at the macro level, but also at the micro level, at a particular individual, like of my income and my time and my family's time, right? We spend a relatively small percentage of our income on food, of our time preparing food, cooking food, eating food, right? Whereas even just a couple of generations ago, I mean, my grandma would spend 6-7 hours in the kitchen every day, right? That alone, not to mention the chickens she had and the garden she ran, and just looking at even incomes. If you go back in our modern economy where you can record, the amount of people's income that go towards food, that has come down in just because of productivity in recent times. And then if you start to take even a broader view of history and you start thinking about medieval Europe and things like that, where 60-70% of everybody's time, efforts, everything they did was basically dedicated to producing and securing enough food just to stay alive.
Right. You got hunting and gathering times and all that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're a hunter and you go hungry half the time too, right? Yeah. So that's kind of when I say something like that, it's I'm not comparing it to 5 years ago when based on inflation and things like that, food probably was a little bit cheaper 5 years ago than it is today. But having that holistic view of what does it really take to provide for the needs of an entire populace, right? And actually an interesting statistic, and I wish I could quote a good source for this, but I'm not going to be able to offhand. But the global food production has only achieved enough, enough efficiency to deliver 2,000 calories to every person on the planet in the last approximately 30 years.
Wow.
Right, so the generation before ours, if you look at it from a global perspective, I mean, in America, we always talk about a 2,000 calorie diet. That's like the USDA guideline, right? All of their recommendations are essentially based around a 2,000 calorie diet. If you look at the generation before ours, from a global perspective, the world didn't even produce enough food for everyone in the world to have 2,000 calories a day. Now, again, I'm not going to give a good source for that, and some of those metrics are not the most precise, but the principle stands, right? That in the history of the world, food has never been as plentiful as it is now.
Wow. Making me hungry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to, I don't mean to.
There's that much to go around,
Well, and I don't mean to minimize, there are some parts of the world that still struggle from food or food security. I guess is the common phrase. It's food scarcity, food security problems. So there's still some problems to tackle on a global macroeconomic perspective.
So, I mean, you're saying that there is 2,000 calories for each person each day, but in some places there may be an abundance, and in some there's less, so it's not really balanced. That's what you mean.
Yeah. So the wealth distribution, and that gets a lot of attention, at a macro consumption level, but that certainly applies to food, where there are there are places in the world where there's lots and lots of food to go around, and I mean, some of that even from just a sense of how much arable land and how much the land can produce, right? In America, we're incredibly blessed. The land here is capable of producing way more food than the current population needs, and we export a lot of food.
Right.
There are other countries in the world that simply don't have that luxury.
Right.
But and then just the income disparities. kind of play into that as well.
Gotcha. And so you taught agricultural economics for a number of years. How many years?
Yeah, about 3 years.
About 3 years?
Taught ag economics at the college level.
Okay, so you have
Ag economics and agricultural marketing.
okay, you have a lot of knowledge there. Obviously, I could just from listening to you. But so, all right, in my mind, so farmers. Let's talk about farmers because we had a conversation, and you were telling me because of how it all balances out in farmers. I would think that a farmer has to have land, and then if they do a livestock or whatever they're farming, that they're usually doing all right. But depending on the market, you mentioned something specifically like a farmer, in order to be very wealthy, they have to have a good crop, and everyone else may have to have a less of a good crop a lot of times.
Yeah, so those are really good questions. It kind of reminded my grandma. I grew up, my grandma, my grandparents all farmed, and she had a phrase that farmers tend to, they live poor and they die rich, just because they struggle so much to make money off of the land, but the land itself ends up being really valuable. And there is kind of this persistent perception that farming is hard, right? It's really hard to make money farming, and that's true. And there are some real kind of fundamental economic factors that play into that. So yeah, you mentioned, you have to have a good crop while everyone else has a bad crop. Well, and that really just comes down to supply and demand, right? It's just a market price is good if supply goes down. Mm-hmm. So maybe another way to think of it, if you have a good year on your farm, typically everyone else around you also had a good year, right? There's just the weather, all the factors that go into a good crop tend to affect everybody pretty evenly. So everybody has a good crop, production goes way up, but that means price tends to fall. So you end up struggling to make a lot of money because prices fell.
Because everybody else is also supplying.
Everybody else has a lot of supply. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the inverse, if everyone has a bad year, prices go up, but you don't have enough production to sell at those higher prices to make a bunch of money. So that's kind of the dynamic that really narrows the opportunities that farming has for delivering good returns. And mm-hmm. Good, I mean kind of the outsized returns that typically an investor or a modern capitalist would be looking for. Mm-hmm. Farming, and actually when I taught ag economics, I taught an agricultural marketing class, and one of the things we discussed was kind of a commodity versus a product, right? How do you decommoditize your goods in order to differentiate and possibly capture a better price and more profit than you would get with just a pure commodity. But for most farming situations, it is just a commodity, right? Your corn is not different than the corn of the guy down the road, which means, to make money, you have to be the cheapest production, right? And that applies to any production industry that's based on a commodity market. Right, the only way you win is to produce most cheaply.
Wow.
Well, in farming, there's not a lot of opportunities. Like the best practices tend to get picked up by everybody very quickly. So having kind of a distinct production method of some kind that's going to give you an advantage is really hard. Which means every time you kind of see an increase in efficiency, it kind of immediately gets sucked back up into the price. And so you see, and most modern first world economies have gravitated towards what a lot of people refer to as like corporate farming. Right? You don't see a lot of individual family farms that that used to make up the backbone, right? The entire base of the agricultural sector a couple of generations ago was small family farms. And there's still a lot of romanticism, and I personally love that. Again, my family comes from that background. And it's easy to kind of mourn the transition away from that, right? That idealistic life towards this corporate farming. But that's really what has to happen in order for production to be efficient enough. It tends to aggregate toward an oligopoly environment where there's not thousands and thousands of players in the market. Certainly regionally, you get bigger operators that get to that point that you are making a good enough profit that it's worth continuing to invest in. And that's really enabled our lifestyles, right? I mean, like 1% of the U.S. population works in farming now, and everyone else gets to work in, all sorts of other stuff. It's freeing in a lot of ways. You're not constantly bound to preparing food 7 hours a day, right?
But very challenging to make it independently.
Oh yeah, very, very challenging. Yeah, and the term hobby farm is one that you hear a lot nowadays, right? Which, I mean, I can't imagine what my grandma would have thought if someone talked about farming as a hobby.
Like having a garden.
Yeah, having a garden, having a couple of cows or chickens, just because it's something you enjoy, right? It's kind of that connection to the land, even though it's way more expensive than just going to the grocery store in almost all cases.
Right, right.
But yeah, again, it's a hobby. You're not necessarily doing it because you're not doing it more efficiently. You're not saving money, right? But it's something you enjoy. It's a fun hobby, and I think that's great.
Right. And speaking of expensive, chocolate prices currently are very, very high. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so I guess about 3 weeks ago we blew through the all-time market highs for cocoa beans. And then we've just continued pushing past that. So
what's going on there? Why is it so high? Like why?
Yeah.
Everybody's wanting chocolate or what?
So this is more of a supply-driven jump in the market.
Okay.
So if you look at the last 20 years even of cocoa bean. So cocoa beans are what chocolate's made out of. So cocoa bean prices, if you look at the commodity exchanges, which there's 2 exchanges that trade cocoa bean contracts, one in London and one in New York. But the kind of the range between $2,500 and $3,500 per ton has been the trading range for almost 20 years. And then in the last 5 or 6 months, the prices have just gone up almost exponentially. So we broke the all-time high at over $6,000 a ton a couple of weeks ago. And then in the last week, those have pushed up past $8,000 a ton.
Wow.
So we're 30% higher than the previous all-time price high. And to your question about what's causing that, so the vast majority, 70 to 80% of the world's cocoa is grown in West Africa. And the lion's share of that is actually just 2 countries. It's the Ivory Coast and Ghana.
Okay.
And weather has been a big factor this last year, pushing production down. And I'm not an agronomist, so this is kind of you're getting some of this secondhand. So
this is one of those things you know a little about.
Yeah, that's right. That's a little about. So they've gotten they've not gotten the moisture that they need, right? They would have wanted more rain, but I guess from what I've read, they've also gotten the rain like at the wrong times, right? They've got like too much rain early, which caused kind of some mold issues, and so that impacted production. And then they had dry conditions that impact production. And then regions of the country are getting hit with a virus. It's a plant virus. Swollen shoot is what it's called.
Swollen shoot. And
it's decimating regions of the cocoa crop in West Africa right now. And there's no. And again, this is secondhand because again, I'm not an agronomist, but like if a tree gets infested, it sounds like there's almost no recovery for it. Like you have to replace that tree. So then, that tree's gone. You lose
That takes
100%.
years.
It takes 3 years to regrow a tree that will produce cocoa beans again.
Oh, wow.
So, the cocoa crop's down, depending on the reports, and this crop year's not quite played out yet, but somewhere around 15% versus previous years. And last year was down versus the year prior, so we're kind of seeing this downward trend. But this is the first year that you've really seen that supply shortage just, send prices skyrocketing, right?
Wow.
Well, and that's something that surprises a lot of people too. People think about prices quadrupling. That that doesn't mean supply fell by 50 or even 30%. Right, in these commodity markets, very small shifts, like a 10% shift in either supply or demand, can have an exponential effect on prices.
Yeah. Wow. I hope that swollen shoot. That's what I
Yeah.
hope that there's something cures that somehow, because that's not good.
It's terrible, and the worst is the farmers, the families that's affecting right now, because they're just losing their livelihood. They're losing they're losing their farms. So it's hard. It is hard, and I guess there's a lot that someone who knows more about that could talk about, in terms of the biodiversity and the husbandry that should be there to prevent those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
But
Wow.
as it is right now, we're the stories, again, what I'm reading and gathering, we try to be knowledgeable of what's going on the ground. And we're probably at least several years from kind of getting out of the woods, so to speak, in terms of swollen shoot,
Wow.
at least.
Thoughts definitely with the families with those farms, and I hope that they can come back from that.
Yeah.
Definitely. But I understand now why. That's a big reason why that price is so high, because it's harder to come by, right? The plants.
Yeah, that supply. Yeah, supply's just down.
Wow. So that's as far as like tons. You said it's $8,000 a ton right now, or is
Yeah, it's over 8,000.
how many tons is a semi trailer?
Typical semi trailer will be between 15 and 20 tons of product.
So it's like a very small amount then. A ton.
Yeah,
What's a
truckload.
ton? What holds a ton? Can you? And that's the plant, the cacao plant.
So cocoa's grown on trees. Yeah, cacao.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So it's a tree. It's a flowering tree.
Wow.
And a single tree, depending on the species in the region, can do between a half and a ton in a year, in a crop season. But yeah, a ton of beans, it's, about 4 feet by 4 feet by 5 feet is the kind of the typical
That's
container.
That costs $8,000 right now.
Right, yeah, that's exactly right.
Wow. What is the lowest, like since you've been in the chocolate business, what's the lowest that's been?
The lowest, about 2,400 without actually looking back at the price history.
And, wow, so it's nearly quadruple right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly right.
Wow. All right. Well, that's
And yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say
That's-
you're starting to see there's a bit of a lag, but you are starting to see those prices flow through into chocolate prices on the shelf. Hershey's, Mars, Nestle, all the the big chocolate makers that they put out their press releases, and they're always talking about what they're going to do, and yeah, they're starting to signal that they're having to flow some of these cost increases through to prices, because when you see a big spike, often the chocolate makers, right, the chocolate price on the shelf doesn't swing that much, right? There's kind of through the supply chain, some of that price fluctuation gets absorbed. So if it's just kind of a transitory spike, then it might never actually translate through to the price shelf, and that'll just get absorbed by the different players in the supply chain. And part of that is if the price drops, right, that'll also just get absorbed, and some of the players in the supply chain will make a little extra profit that year.
Oh, okay.
But right now, the price increase, this high price, is been high for so long and is forecasted to stay out for so much longer that it is very, very, I mean, right now it is starting to show up on the shelf, and there's more and more talk about how, the shelf price of chocolate is going to start jumping up pretty substantially in some cases, especially for, darker chocolates that use more cocoa beans than your more candy chocolates.
Right. So that includes verse, right? You're gonna have to. Is the price up?
Yeah. So we've been having those conversations just even recently about how we manage that, and because we don't, again, we don't want to overshoot either, thinking, our price is going to come back down next crop year and things like that. But yeah, we've had multiple conversations on how we handle that, and how much do we increase it, and very, very difficult decisions to make, and because it's a very uncertain environment, right? It's everybody's kind of crystal ball trying to figure out what the future might do.
You definitely have to forecast and try to predict, and it's hard to say. You can study and not know what's going to happen.
That's exactly right. Prices could stay at $8,000. They could fall back to $3,000, right?
Well, I look forward. I've sampled one or two of these, and it is very, very good. So you see, Verse Chocolate. Nathan this is his project here, right? There's one of them.
Yeah. So we launched Verse Chocolate October. Well, so we'd been did over a year of product development, research and development, finding the right beans. So the kind of the husbandry, the ripeness of the beans, the way the cocoa beans are fermented, the way they get roasted, like all of those, have a big impact in the ultimate flavors. So we spent a year making sure we found the right beans, got the flavor profile we wanted. So it is an incredible dark chocolate. I mean, we do say it's the best dark chocolate on the market. It doesn't have the same kind of bitter and astringent notes, which, again, I know you've tried it before, and you're welcome to pop one of these open and try one if you have a mind to at the moment.
If you're going to twist my arm, where can you find this?
So here in Springfield, we are in 10 different retailers in Springfield. So Hy-Vee carries us, Mama Jean's carries us, the Price Cutters all carry us.
Okay.
Nationally, our biggest stockist is Whole Foods.
Whole Foods, okay.
So that, again, it varies by region, but that's our big carrier has been Whole Foods. They've supported us since early on.
Yeah. Can you order it online?
Yeah. So we sell through Amazon. We have a website as well where we order, and have our fulfillment center actually just south of Springfield here.
Okay. What's the website?
Versechocolate.com.
Versechocolate.com.
Yeah.
And you can order this. What am I having? 70%?
Yeah, this is our 70% dark sea salt. So 70% refers to the cocoa content. So it's 70% cocoa in that, and then the remainder is sugar, and there's a little vanilla and some other elements in there.
This is healthy?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Less sugar than your banana, your apple. Yeah. Yep.
That's good.
Glad.
Wow.
Yeah, we're real proud of it. So yeah, we actually launched the product October of 2020. So right in the thick of the pandemic, which was quite the adventure. Figure out how to start a chocolate factory and everything else right in the middle of that.
Strictly online,
launched strictly online when we first started. About 6 months later, we were able to get into the first stores. But yeah, so I've been deeply involved. I ran our factory up in Michigan for a little while, and actually acted as president for about a year, running it's a subsidiary of a parent company.
Wow.
But I ran that for about a year until we kind of decided we needed some kind of more knowledgeable, again, someone with deeper expertise to kind of step into that. So we reshuffled, and yeah, you mentioned one of many projects. So we also one of my favorite projects, I'd say, we represent as a broker several companies that are processing cocoa at the origin in West Africa.
Okay.
So I'd mentioned earlier that that's where the vast, again, 80% of the world's cocoa is grown. But for the history of cocoa production, that all gets exported raw into Europe, and it gets processed, in the Netherlands or in Switzerland and several other countries too. But Netherlands really the epicenter of cocoa processing globally. But in the last decade or so, the kind of local entrepreneurs have started processing. They've built processing plants. They're really starting to almost have an industrial resurgence in some ways to process the crop locally. And it's great. I mean, personally, from an economic development perspective, it's absolutely the best thing they could do down there is to bring those value-added jobs, give people the opportunities to do something besides farm, right? Like, that back to our conversation earlier, it's so hard, right? The fundamental economics of farming just make it really hard to get a leg up. So the more opportunities a kid who grew up on a farm has to go do something other than farming for their career, that's how you really kind of grow the economy.
Gotcha.
So yeah, we have several suppliers down there that are processing cocoa locally, making like a cocoa mass, which is used, the chocolate used for chocolate production, cocoa powders, cocoa butters, and it's really exciting. Even just two of our suppliers, kind of our principal suppliers, are building over the next 4 years. They are in progress with close to 400,000 tons of cocoa processing capacity.
That's a lot.
It is, yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, at current cocoa prices, that's like 112 billion, $12 billion worth of product that they would be processing domestically, and
That's at the current price now.
yeah, that's what those prices are now. So, and again, I mean, they do capture some of that value if they just export the bean, but they're bringing 25 to 30% additional economic value to the country by doing that processing locally.
Wow. So you visit some of these places? I mean, you do. So where do you recommend Africa, Europe, and what's one country that's like, I'm going back there, whether it's for chocolate or not?
Oh, that is a great question. So a couple of years ago, I visited San Pedro it's in West Africa. It's in the Ivory Coast, a coastal town. It's to this day probably one of the favorite places I visited. I guess kind of a side note, it reminded me a lot of, I lived in Brazil for a couple of years, and it actually reminded me a lot of Brazil, which might be part of the reason, but just beautiful coastal town, very, very rural, kind of untouched in some ways, with some of the best restaurants I've ever been to in the world, right?
Oh, okay.
I mean, I've been to some very high quality, almost renowned restaurants in the U.S. and Europe, and I really enjoy it. Like, they had fantastic Italian food, the seafood, all you could eat seafood buffets with better seafood than you could get in a 5-star restaurant anywhere I've been in the U.S. I mean, just like all you could eat crab tails like this, right? Just butter. I mean, they talk about crab melting like butter in your mouth. It was incredible.
Okay.
But yeah, I really enjoyed San Pedro. I thought it was a neat place.
Wow. I'm gonna have to start looking at flights now. You mentioned all the seafood
It was
buffets.
great. There's a lot of cocoa farming. Just again, I really enjoyed it. That was the first time I tried cocoa fruit. Actually, that's the first and only time I've had cocoa fruit.
Cocoa fruit.
Yeah.
You just ate it straight out of the raw, or what?
Yeah, just raw right out of the pod.
Wow.
It's quite delicious.
Yeah. I've had seeds, cacao seeds, but I haven't had the actual fruit of it. But it's worth trying.
Yeah. It's very different from what you would think of.
Fruity or chocolatey or?
Yeah, it's fruity. You wouldn't think of chocolate at all when when you tried it.
You think
you
like
really wouldn't.
cantaloupe or?
I mean, it's so sweet. Have you had jackfruit? You familiar with
Yes, I had
jackfruit?
jackfruit.
That'd probably be the most similar thing. But it doesn't. Jacknote has kind of like a dry off taste to it that I've never been a huge fan of. The cocoa fruit doesn't have that. It's much smoother.
Okay, so try cocoa fruit in San Pedro for dessert with
Yeah,
the seafood
with
buffet.
seafood. Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. Lobster and French bread.
Lobster and French bread.
A
Wow.
lot of good French food down there.
Wow, I
It's
hope
French speaking, so there's a lot of good
so.
French food down
I
there.
need to learn some French then. Okay, bonjour, and what
Yeah.
else do I need to know? Thank you. What's thank you in French?
Merci.
Merci.
Yeah. Merci.
Okay, that's good to know. Hopefully, I can afford a plane ticket because now I'm really craving a seafood buffet.
Yeah.
But
For sure.
I really appreciate all the info that I'm processing all of it still. You definitely have a lot of knowledge, and it's good to know that. And your chocolate, fantastic.
Well, my pleasure. Again, I'm humbled, and especially by the kind of the crew you brought here today to do this. And I mentioned earlier I taught agricultural economics, so a lot of this is stuff I love to talk about with my students, and snippets from some lectures and stuff even. So I miss teaching a lot. So it was great chatting with you.
Good, good. We'll have to do it again sometime. Thank you for watching, and remember that chocolate is healthy, right?